SBS wishes to advise members of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities that the following program contains images, voices or names of deceased persons and may cause distress.
I don't think anyone except the monastery realised the treasure trove that they had.
We were told priceless. People knew they had a gallery, but we didn't know they had paintings worth stealing.
The robbers have slashed at will, leaving large sections of canvas in the frame.
The word desecration springs to mind.
Some guy just ransacked the Spanish monastery and to take some old master paintings to the Philippines.
Mystery men, setups, this is dangerous business. The whole thing is weird.
There's got to be more to this.
It was all lies.
It has a very dark history and it can't be ignored.
I mean, the world got to know this. You guys got to know the truth.
You are not going to get away with this.
So where do we begin? This all starts with a 175-year-old Catholic monastery built by exiled Spanish monks in a remote corner of the West Australian bush. This is New Norcia.
To be honest, it's incongruous, out of place, out of time.
It is quite a different place. It is a unique place, that's for sure.
It's not something one would associate with Australia. A Benedictine Catholic monastery in the middle of the bush.
Quaint pretty much describes it. It's a little dingly dell, a little settlement about 140 kilometres from Perth. Now, Perth's the most isolated capital city in the world. It's on the edge of the desert and the edge of the ocean. People in the capital, the federal capital, Canberra, can do and say what they like. We don't care. Basically, we'd be just as happy by ourselves. So it's got a different mindset.
So you drive out, you'd head northeast, I suppose, from Perth, from city to country to agriculture, and you just kept driving and driving and driving. And suddenly, there it is. There is this Spanish building and it is sprawling and it is big and you cannot miss it.
Doesn't every place have a bunch of monks living in the bush outside, you know?
But it didn't look inviting. It looked imposing.
You think, why would you build something out here like that?
They were here to expand the Catholic Church and to do it the way it did it in 1846, which was get rid of the culture you're in, make it a European culture. That's what it was there for, to convert, make Catholics out of the Indigenous people. The Benedictines themselves, there's a lot of them around the world, but Benedict of Nursia, an Italian saint, was the one who founded it. Nursia is where it came from. Norcia, Nursia, Norcia. So New Nursia is named after Benedict's birthplace. It developed greatly. They settled, they began schooling. I think the peak, maybe 70 monks when it was at its peak. They had farms, they had water supplies, doctors, teachers, all of those sorts of things. But its main work was prayer.
Vespers in the private chapel. The chanting is Gregorian, sung in Latin. So these are the dedicated men of New Norcia, who just want to be left alone in peace.
There's the first session at dawn, then there was morning prayer, then midday prayer, then 3 o'clock prayer, then Vespers, which is the evening prayer, then Compline. And this was a cycle of every day. And in fact, if you look at the Benedictine motto, it's orare et labore, work and prayer. Surprise, surprise.
The results?
These are the Benedictine monuments in Australia.
The chapels and everything were just magnificent.
It was a little bit of Spain in the middle of nowhere, really.
And that's just the outside.
Through these gates, you leave Australia and you go into a totally different world.
I don't think anyone except the monastery realised the treasure trove that they had within those walls.
For example, this chalice, sterling silver coated over with gold put on with mercury, is the present of Isabella II of Spain to Bishop Salvador, 1857.
It wasn't just treasure. The monks kept everything. And I mean everything.
Bishop Salvador's teeth. And here we have Brother Martiriano's arm.
But by any standards, the most valuable work is stored in a small gallery. More than 100 oil paintings, the work of Italian, Spanish and English artists.
That gallery is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, what? How did all this end up here?
And here, look at the marvelous picture there.
A lot of that artwork would have been probably the oldest, among the oldest artwork that Western Australia had in its possession anywhere.
I've seen better in Rome, but I certainly haven't seen better in the middle of Australia.
It's quite a large collection for a fairly modest, far-flung mission. The collection consisted of approximately 80 or 90 old master paintings. And so they're really important. I mean, they're devotional images, sacred images.
And like any great collection, it comes with its own myths and legends.
One of the earliest pictures brought out by Bishop Salvador in 1846 was a picture called Our Lady of Good Counsel, a picture of the Virgin Mary. So in December 1847, a bushfire was raging in the district and threatened the monastery. I read from Salvador's diary. Unaided, we could not prevent the complete destruction of the mission. In such extreme danger, we took the beautiful picture of Our Lady and placed it against the standing corn, which seemed about to catch fire at any moment. Then, with confident faith, we besought her to look with maternal compassion upon our natives and upon ourselves. Merciful heaven! No sooner was the sacred image of Mary placed in front of the raging fire than the wind blew in the opposite direction, carrying the flames away. And thus did we witness the protection granted by our Holy Mother. So that's a rather lovely story. It's some, yes, divine intercession.
Their rarity is without question. Their financial value hard to assess. Their worth in terms of delight and pleasure beyond any price.
But it turns out hosting such a collection in a bush monastery comes with challenges.
The temperature's wrong, the light's wrong, the place is a fire hazard. In short, moth and dust doth corrupt, and thieves could break through and steal.
Which brings us to the year 1986.
Somebody on social media the other day said, to all you guys who were there in the 80s, was it as good as you say it was? And my answer to that was, yes. So, it was awesome.
All you've heard about the excesses of the 80s are they applied in Perth on steroids. The economy's going gangbusters. The gravy train is firing its way down the tracks.
There was a lot of money around in the 80s. It was quite hedonistic time to be around as well.
The parties.
How you people are feeling tonight?
The politics. America's Cup was huge for Western Australia.
Going to give it our best shot today. Really are.
For most of us who had no interest in yacht racing prior to that, suddenly it was the only thing that we were interested in.
I mean, Alan Bond had won the America's Cup and brought it back to Fremantle. He could do no wrong. It turned out he could do a fair bit of wrong and spend a bit of time in jail for it.
It was big players, big money, big stories.
We lived in interesting times.
You better come down and have a beer.
So that's Perth and WA. Tell me about New Norcia. What was New Norcia like back then?
Well, you know what? I don't think I even was aware of New Norcia prior to the events of 1986.
The Benedictine monks here are finding enormous financial problems. Everywhere you look around the town, the elements and rigours of time can be seen. The vineyard that produced award-winning wines around the country has long gone, as has a large part of the farm and stock, while the running of the town's museum was handed over to lay people.
It was not a major tourist destination. I mean, history buffs would go out there, people into architecture, wildflower people, but it wasn't a major tourist attraction.
New Norcia seemed like miles away.
And then on one baking hot summer's day in 1986, all hell breaks loose.
Paintings, some dating back to the early 16th century, were brutally hacked from their frames.
The robbers have slashed at will, leaving large sections of canvas in the frame.
The reason for the robbery has police and monastery officials baffled. Even if the paintings are recovered, it's feared their treatment at the hands of the thieves will render them beyond repair.
It was chaotic in that
the frames were broken, the canvases were ripped.
The jagged edges of canvas still remaining in some of the frames littering the gallery floor, some propped up against the walls, and you had to take in the moment.
You know, they'd obviously just been quite brutal towards it all, which I found shocking, quite confronting.
It was bewildering, like why? But why the devastation?
What vibe were you picking up from the police at the scene?
I don't think they knew what they were dealing with. I think they were thinking, like all of us, what just happened?
Time to call in Western Australia's brand spanking new Major Crime Squad.
My name's John Skeffington. I spent about 20 years in the CIB. Ended up starting the Major Crime Squad.
So this would have been one of the first crimes that the Major Crime Squad would have done?
This was the first one.
This was the first one?
This was the first great inquiry we had. I was just leaving work and got a cryptic message, something had happened at New Norcia. They had some detectives up there, so I took off. Just thought it was a disgrace that someone cut these valuable paintings out of the frame and taken them away somewhere, you know. We were totally in the blind, wondering what... We didn't even know they had an art gallery there, you know. So we're absorbing all this, the art gallery, the monks, trying to think, oh, shit, you know, where do we go from here type of thing.
Detective Sergeant John Skeffington, he's issued photographs of the paintings Australia-wide. Interpol and airport security have been alerted.
In those days, we started the Major Crime Squad with 6 detectives. I believe there's about 200 now in headquarters there. The main people was Ken Gregson. Ken was in charge of the main team, and it was an ideal man for the job because it was perspiration, not inspiration, so we needed detectives like Ken who would, you know, buckle down and do the job.
So in your career, how many art heists do you reckon you encountered?
One.
These days, you mostly find Ken with his beloved racehorse, State Trooper.
Named after a good Bruce Springsteen song and being an ex-copper.
But in 1986, he was the Major Crime Squad's lead detective.
We got called in and just told there's been a big art theft at New Norcia. Go. It was late in the afternoon by the time we got to New Norcia to see what had happened, and I mean, I'm no art connoisseur, But the word desecration springs to mind. It was awful.
What are the first thoughts that goes through your head as an investigator?
Where do we start?
Well, for starters, there was a witness, and indeed a victim.
Yeah, Connie, her name was.
Well, everyone had left the museum, and there were two gentlemen still in the museum, and they grabbed me and mugged me and took me upstairs.
Well, she basically said that two men had come in. But next thing she knew, one of them was speaking to her and then grabbed hold of her and put his hand over her mouth.
She was very nervous because she'd had her mouth taped over.
And she was shut in the toilet after that.
I could hear them slashing the pictures and just things being thrown around. It was just devastating to hear it.
Oh, look, you know, your heart went out to Connie. Why would you do that to her?
Tying her up, it just sort of, you know, and bugging her in the toilet cubicle just seemed just strange, not something that we'd really, you know, been exposed to, I suppose.
Connie McNaughton was locked in that building for an hour before she could call for help. And in that time, 26 paintings, half of what was thought to be the greatest religious art collection in this country, was gone.
There was very little we could have done on the day, given that there was only a lady there and there were two strong men, and they had their way, and it was just very hard to know what else we could do.
But Connie wasn't finished with the thieves. So that is the statement that Connie McNaughton gave about the two men that attacked her and took the paintings. Would it be OK if you read it for me, please?
Yeah, sure. And it does sound like Connie's words. I can vouch for that.
The first of the two men I can describe as about 39 to 40 years of age, about 6 feet tall.
Tanned complexion, heavy build, beer stomach.
Wearing dark or navy blue trousers.
Blue floral pattern type shirt.
The second man was about 5'8" tall. Short, straight hair, moustache, fair complexion, stocky build, a strong-looking man.
He was wearing brown trousers and a light brown shirt. Brown was big in the 80s.
He appeared to be Australian.
When you get a description like that, is that very much to go on?
Well, it's more than what you had before.
I mean, I just love the way she's got such detail, truly. Because it must have been a very traumatic time, and I'm sure she was thinking, you are not going to get away with this.
How is the quality of the security at Norcia?
Oh, very, very limited. There was none, really.
The gallery's alarm system wasn't operating at the time of the heist. It's only activated after hours. In fact, none of the gallery's works, some of which are considered to be priceless, are attached to any form of security system.
So you got a fairly elderly lady, no security. This place is kind of a sitting duck, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, it was.
It's a situation likely to come under serious review by the officials, yet a little too late for those paintings no longer gracing the walls of the gallery.
Did you have a sense at the time of how much that collection was actually worth?
As far as the value of the collection goes, I don't think anyone really knew.
We were told priceless. How do you value priceless? Well, I can't answer that, and they couldn't answer it either. We sought as many people as we could in the art world, university, the art gallery, Western Australia, trying to get some sort of a value, if we could, on the paintings. We were told anywhere from a few million to millions.
People were excited. I mean, wow, people knew they had a gallery, but we didn't know they had paintings worth stealing.
The reason for the robbery has police and monastery officials baffled. Some aspects indicate professionals, but gallery officials say professionals wouldn't treat the paintings in such a brutal manner.
On the surface, it seems like something that should be classified as a high-level art theft, but turned out a shambles.
How did these blokes know it was there, for starters? Did they have any concept of the value? If you were going to so much trouble to, plan an art heist, why absolutely destroy the very thing that they were trying to obtain? None of it made sense. None of it made sense.
My thoughts were, there's got to be more to this.
Described as possibly the best private collection in the Southern Hemisphere, today the gallery was a sad sight, robbed of its most precious treasures by two men in a daring daylight raid late yesterday.
Well, it was so mysterious, and the building was mysterious, and the location was mysterious, and why have you got a monastery in the middle of this bush? That was mysterious. And what? There's been an art theft? What have they got in that place?
Paintings, some dating back to the early 16th century, were brutally hacked from their frames.
There had to be more to it.
Yesterday, two men destroyed that collection in just 40 minutes.
Did it make news around the rest of the country?
The story was big. The story was big because the coverage was national.
People were astounded. They thought, what would they be stealing out there? And people were actually pretty chuffed, really. Thought, oh, this puts us on the world map. We've got international art thieves, apparently, that's what we're told.
They say if the theft is the work of professionals, the art will definitely be sent to international markets.
For the police, they were dumbfounded. The monks were mortified. Connie was furious. And the media was like, well, where do we start? And no one could really answer those questions in those first few days.
But a breakthrough was just around the corner. So our thieves made a few big mistakes. The first one, the getaway car.
My first major break we really got, someone had seen a late model Falcon. That turned out to be a crucial piece of information.
When the forensic guys saw a tyre mark through the car park, they copied the car mark and found out it was a tyre for a recently produced Falcon sedan.
So imagine driving this flash new car around New Norcia. Most people are, driving old bangers, old utes and things like that. It would have just stood out to everybody.
And the thing is, it wasn't just any brand new Ford Falcon.
Now, most hire cars, as we know, are generally white. Well, when they came over here, they hired a gold car.
Gold-coloured Falcon.
Goldie-coloured car.
All right, fine, the car was gold. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find an 80s gold Falcon? Just use your imagination.
A gold car, so when the police asked witnesses, did you notice anything unusual that day? Oh yeah, there was this gold car hanging around, I hadn't seen that before.
And so, the chase had begun.
Another team had to take off and go to every town with a Falcon, gold Falcon. So they went right through the northwest, located every car, interviewed the driver, come back to Perth and Murphy's Law. They thought we'd have one more look before we give it away. They lifted the wheel and underneath it there's flakes.
Which matched flakings that of the paintings that were stolen. So we knew we were on the right track then.
And with the car came a paper trail.
Now what happened? These blokes used their own names. They always used their own names. To hire the car, to book and check into a motel.
Once again, our forensic people examined the two rooms where these guys were staying and, again, found paint flakes on the carpet.
We thought there was a divine intervention somewhere. We seemed to be going pretty steadily.
And get this, return tickets from Sydney, Perth, Sydney in their own names. Now, back then, you could have actually booked a ticket in anyone's name and paid for it, and the chances of getting picked up on it were pretty slim. A smart thing might have been not to take the flight, to throw the police off the trail. Like, oh, they've gone back to Sydney and they've gone somewhere else. But not these clowns, went straight back to Sydney.
These weren't the Australia's brightest criminals, put it that way.
It didn't take too long for word to get around, somebody come from over east, which made us all feel much better in Perth. At least it wasn't us.
So we knew then that someone was going to have to go to Sydney to follow up on it. I was delegated myself to do that with another detective, Barry Mann. Barry, my partner, stole a line from the Blues Brothers and suggested we're on a mission from God. But that seemed to stick.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the information of those passengers.
What happens when you hit New South Wales?
When we got to New South Wales on the mission from God, we met Sergeant John Laycock, who was in charge of a team of detectives at Penrith.
What were your first impressions of John Laycock?
Absolute top operator, very committed to what we were doing. I'd hate to have him chasing me, put it that way.
What were the first thoughts that went through your head?
Look, when the call came through initially, it didn't get a great response. It wasn't something that we were keen to get involved in.
I've heard that cops don't like art crime. Why is that?
I think firstly they don't know anything about art. It's not the Starsky and Hutch type police that police like to go and get involved in.
Yeah.
Guns drawn and crashing through doors.
But something caught your interest.
The whole thing is weird, very unusual. Paintings being stolen from the walls of a religious monastery run by monks. Extremely valuable, quite rare, very unique. Just a fascinating subject.
How far along were they? What did they have?
Oh, they had done their homework very well. They had tracked down who the offenders were.
We've got two names, but in the interim, our forensic people had found a fingerprint which checked out in Sydney to this person known as Nigel.
Nigel, a used car salesman, I think, from out around Penrith Way, west of Sydney.
That speaks for itself sometimes. There's some very good car salesmen out there, but I think Nigel belonged to the other breed.
And only used car salesmen have got worse reputations than journalists. Big bloke, he was quite tall, he was a big bloke.
Tall, overweight, strong as a marshmallow.
Now, he was also a mad punter, a mad gambler.
No more bets, Nick.
And like most mad punters, most gamblers, he became a bad one.
He was a person who was heavily in debt.
So this guy owed a lot of money. He needed money to pay these people, and he needed it quickly.
We'd mounted some surveillance.
You know, they were dogging guys and recording where they were going, who they were talking to.
After 2 or 3 days in Sydney, we decided we'd had enough. So we pulled up Nigel.
We were able to intercept him on his way to work.
Good morning, mate. You must be Nigel.
He denied any knowledge. I told him straight up front because we knew he had the right bloke.
So, Nigel, good trip to WA? See a bit of culture, did you?
He's off. I've read the papers. Don't look at me just because I was in Perth, right? Doesn't mean a thing.
Nigel, we just found the paintings in your house.
He still had the paintings in his house?
Went into his bedroom, opened the cupboard, and right in front of us there was a roll.
Oh, you gotta be shitting me.
I mean, these people were morons, absolute morons.
That's when the house of cards started to tumble a bit.
More than a bit. Along with the 11 stolen paintings, police also found photos of New Norcia, a courier receipt for the stolen paintings, and the name and number of a man called Noel.
Ah, Noel, poor Noel.
Noel was a stocky guy, about 5'8", 5'9", in the old. Pretty scruffy, I think he had a bit of a beard.
He had a pizza joint and a disco. Not at the same place at the same time, I hope, but he had both of those business. Unfortunately, Noel also had a heroin habit, which became a very bad addiction. He was in a bad way. Noel was not the bloke you'd want to have in your team.
I think he was watching his garden at this time at the front of his house. I said, I'm from
West
Western
Australian Police, Noel. I'm investigating the theft of 26 paintings from the New Norcia Monastery.
His right knee, I think it was, just the legs started shaking straight away. He didn't really have anywhere to go.
Hey! Dickhead! Have you not got yourself to say, you fucking rat? Fuck you!
Noel and Nigel were in the bin, as we say.
Did either of them scream master criminal?
No way in the world. They had the intelligence on base speed hunt.
He said I was expecting a more hardened criminal, and I didn't get one. He was an amateur. What looked like should have been a professional job was given to an amateur, which seems silly, but there you go.
What did they tell you about how the theft actually went down?
Nigel, he threw his hands up very quickly.
Well, looks like I've got nowhere to run.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I took the paintings, all right?
He admitted that he'd come over on the previous occasion to Perth on his own, but got cold feet and pulled out of it.
I think he found the job was too big for him and he needed some assistance. And he came back and then commissioned Noel to go across with him.
Look, whatever you guys think you know, you don't, and I don't know nothing, so, yeah, it's bullshit.
No. We know you were there, mate.
Yeah, OK, I did. I went to Perth, right? But I didn't know nothing about those bloody paintings. It wasn't until we got there and Nigel put it on me that he wanted to knock them off.
Did Nigel say anything about what his motivation for doing the crime was?
Oh, it was money. That was it, money. He needed money.
But I was only doing what I was told.
And what were you told, Nigel?
I was told I would get 50 grand for stealing the paintings.
Nigel told me there was 3,000 in it for me. But I didn't know how much they were worth. Okay? I nearly choked when I saw them in the paper.
No one was supposed to be there.
But someone was.
Yeah.
Whose idea was it to tie up the old lady?
That was Noel. Noel tied her up, stuck her in the dunny.
That was Nigel, he did that.
They both tried to play down, wanting to hurt her. We didn't know, no way they wanted to hurt her.
I kept talking to her, making sure she was all right. She wasn't hurt, was she?
And how'd you know which paintings to steal?
I didn't, that was all Nigel.
Had photos. I was told to take the small ones and then to carefully cut out the larger ones inside the frame.
Carefully, eh?
How'd they go with that?
Oh, big fail.
To call it a comedy of errors is being far too kind. This was a stuff-up from start to finish.
I don't think it was as easy as they thought. They hadn't planned it that well.
Jesus over there, yeah? Creepy guy with the beard. He'll fit in, no worries. Oh.
Oh, shit.
The size of the paintings and the boot of the car didn't match.
Shit.
Oh, it won't fit in the boot of the car. Bit late for that now, mate. Oh, it's OK, we'll just slash it with a razor.
But they could have been more careful.
Oh, shit.
You idiot.
In the end, they unfortunately hacked them out rather than carefully cut them out.
I think the quantity and the volume far exceeded what they thought they were going to get.
I assume panic set in. They just end up trying to grab as many as they could. We weren't chasing Australia's brightest criminals. We thought we might have been initially, but as it turned out, we weren't.
Yeah, well, took longer than we thought.
We ended up just taking whatever we could.
And what'd you do with the paintings after you left the monastery?
Took them to a hotel, put them under Noel's bed.
And then?
Went to the casino. That was great.
The next morning, Nigel posted the rolled-up paintings to a Sydney car yard, labelling them mechanical parts. All the paintings, except for one.
One of the paintings would not fit in a cylinder.
What'd you do with it?
Jumped on it, chucked in the bin.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Oh, sorry, mate. A lover of art, are you?
I thought right from the start, there's more involved in this than just the two guys.
And once again, Nigel hadn't done a great job of covering his tracks.
Well, apart from finding the paintings at Nigel's place, also in his bedroom, two names and phone numbers, which turned out to be Noel and Bruce.
And who's Bruce?
Yes, the mastermind.
So, how are you going so far? Keeping up? Well, just in case, we have a Spanish monastery in the WA bush, a priceless art collection, a bungled heist, the capture of not one, but two not very good crooks, and now a name.
These people were too low down the food chain to organise it by themselves. It was so unused, it was so way out. People from Sydney going all the way to Perth to steal these valuable paintings. It just didn't make a lot of sense.
Nigel? Who's Bruce?
Dunno.
Oh, that's funny. Has he written his phone number down here?
Huh. Wasn't me.
Nigel, we can and we will find out.
All right, Bruce was the bloke who hired me to go to Perth to get the paintings. He's the one who organised the whole thing.
Nigel gave a fairly detailed description of what had occurred. Nigel and Bruce met at the Penrith Leys Club.
This fellow named Bruce must have either been aware that Nigel had money problems.
Yeah, mate, so I'm fucked. I've got the banks after me, after my home. I've got my wife, wants my head in a platter. As I said before, absolutely fucked.
Bruce put the idea to Nigel that there was some money to be made.
$50,000 is what he was told he'd get.
And that got the attention of Nigel.
Why he would pick on Nigel to be the main man to do the job, I don't know. I wouldn't have picked him, but...
And where are the rest of these paintings?
I think Bruce has got them.
What do you mean, you think?
Well, he came by trying to collect some of the paintings, but he didn't have my money. So, he kept half of them until he paid up. Not stupid.
So you knew all that before you went to go talk to Bruce?
We knew all that before we went to Bruce.
Just a second.
Oh, hello. Can I help you?
All right, hang on a minute. Let's back this truck up a bit.
Bruce was the main offender from our perspective, and he was living in a place called Warramoo in the mountains.
Clearly not from the same circles as the other two guys. He was a bit more polished and he had some sort of connection to the art world.
Bruce was a sort of a mild-mannered knockabout bloke. He'd been a baker and a chef, and he had a art restoration business.
He was what we call a clean skin. He had no previous contact with the law. Reasonable level of intelligence, not somebody who you'd think was involved in high-level criminal activity.
Come in then.
He was quite pleasant, invited us in, we had a discussion. I remember he pointed to some paintings on the wall of his lounge room and said, that's the only paintings we got. We then told him we were going to search the whole house.
Bruce, you can take a seat, mate. And while you're at it, shut up.
Charming.
What was his reaction like? Do you remember?
He was very cool. He denied any knowledge of any stolen paintings, didn't know what we were talking about. Fairly calm.
I really don't know what this is all about, you know?
Well, I think we knew a bit more than what he thought we knew.
I just don't want to waste your time any longer. We could just chalk it up to a mix-up.
It was a double-storey place, and the foundations were underneath, and you could walk in underneath the house, in between the footings. Amongst the footings were what I thought was rolls of lino, and had a closer look, and it was obvious then that it was the paintings.
How does he react when you present him with these paintings?
Oh, old paintings. I didn't know you were looking for old paintings. You should have said.
That was a get in the car moment.
What do you mean a get in the car moment?
Well, it's time for him to come with us.
We were lucky. If Bruce had given Nigel the $50,000 he was promised, then the paintings would have been given to Bruce some days earlier. We wouldn't have found them. You do rely a lot on luck, and we were lucky.
You've got paintings from Nigel. You've now found a bunch of paintings at Bruce.
Yes.
Was that all of the paintings?
No.
Of course not. In fact, there were nearly a dozen still unaccounted for.
So, Bruce, it's time to cut the shit.
I just think this has all been a big mix-up.
Not a mix-up, mate. Just tell us where the rest of the paintings are.
Okay. Look, I think they're in the office in the city, but they might be on their way to Manila.
Did you say Manila?
Bruce had some paintings at his house, recovered those, but he admitted that there are, I think it was about 11 or 12, that were about to be flown to Manila.
Look, I know a guy at the Philippines Airlines who was going to have them flown out. I think it's tomorrow, but it might be tonight.
Well, I need a name, and I need it right now.
Peter. So, things just went up a gear. We now have 3 people arrested. Most, but not all, of the 26 stolen paintings have been recovered. And our so-called mastermind, Bruce, has just dropped an almighty bombshell.
Just tell us where the rest of the paintings are.
Look, I know a guy at the Philippines Airlines. He was going to have them flown out. I think it's tomorrow, but it might be tonight.
They fucking... what?
That was the big hook over here, that it became an international art heist. You know, little old Perth, little old New Norcia, and suddenly we've got people coming over, stealing paintings, bringing them back to Sydney, and then they're going to ship them out to Manila.
Which brings me to the lounge room of a Sydney retiree. Everybody, meet Peter. How long were you at Philippine Airlines for?
Probably around about 15 or 16 years. About 16 years, yes.
Good job?
Loved it. Wonderful job. Sales and marketing. Getting, as we used to say in the old days, bums on seats. But it wasn't only that, it was also promoting the Philippines as a destination. It has its own beauty. People are wonderful and it's a really nice destination. You go to Manila, big, hot city, great place for food, entertainment, nightlife. Just a big, big, bustling city.
So, tell me about the day you realised you were part of an international art heist.
Yes, when someone phoned me up and said, we're the federal police, and said, do you have any paintings? And as soon as the phone call ended, there was a knock on the door, wasn't there?
Oh, wow, that's fast.
Oh, they were there, yes. So within 1 minute, there's a knock on the door and there's a couple of plainclothes detectives standing in your doorway. Quite shocked, I can assure you. And then when they explained to me why they were there, I was even more shocked.
So take me back to how you first met Bruce.
I would have met him through Mike Taylor.
Mike Taylor was Bruce's business partner in the Philippines art reproduction business, as well as a Manila hotel. But we'll get to that later.
Mike was a, can I use the word Westie, like an average sort of Joe, run-of-the-mill sort of a chap. Bruce was sort of a different character completely. Looked a bit more business-like, if I can put it in that term. But Bruce was just normal. I'm very surprised that all this was going on with either of them, if I may say so.
A few days before his arrest, Bruce had come up to Peter asking for a favour.
Would I able to send some paintings up to the Philippines? He wanted them there in a hurry, and he explained to me, which sounded plausible, he wanted some restorations done. I thought they were just some paintings, everyday paintings that needed a bit of a touch-up. Because in the Philippines, they do this sort of thing.
Peter contacted a friend who was due to fly to Manila in a few days' time.
Malcolm was a professional photographer here in Sydney. It was like someone asked me to do them a favour. And if it was going to go, if Malcolm was happy to take them up, I saw nothing wrong with it at all.
Had Bruce ever asked you to transfer anything else to the Philippines?
Prior to the paintings, yes. One day, what he did, he asked me whether I could send a video and some magazines up to the Philippines. So obviously, on reflection, the idea of buttering me up, grooming me for this, because they already knew about, the robbery. So the planning of that must have occurred over a period of time. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment situation. I can assure you, if I had seen them, they wouldn't have gone anywhere. I think I felt betrayed at the time, apart from being shocked.
Which brings us back to...
There were two charming New South Wales detectives at the door. They asked me whether I had any paintings, and I said they were in the office. My mind was racing, I can assure you. The enormity of it was starting to unfold before my eyes. It's not a matter of just a painting, someone's private painting. This is when they explained that it came out of a monastery. What's going to happen to me next? Because my job's on the line.
So when was the parcel due to go to Manila?
The next day. Very quick, yeah.
I mean, I've often thought about it in the terms of a Hollywood movie where there's a countdown clock and the bomb's due to go off when the clock hits zero, and all about 2 seconds before the zero, someone comes in and saves the day.
Art experts have begun assessing the damage to a $3 million collection of paintings stolen in Western Australia 2 weeks ago and recovered in Sydney today.
I was sitting in a corner and in the office. It was in a cylinder.
There was a cylindrical box that contained the paintings, large one. I think from memory it would have been 10 or 11 paintings.
If those paintings had been flown to Manila, I'm certain we never would have seen them again. No, we wouldn't have got them back.
They were cock a hoop. I mean, they got the people involved pretty quickly and they stopped them from going to Manila.
We thought there was a divine intervention somewhere. I wouldn't say that, just ask.
If I had sent them up internally within Philippine Airlines, I definitely would have been sacked on the spot.
But you do rely a lot on luck, and we were lucky.
Was it big news?
It would have been big news, but Lindy Chamberlain knocked us off the front page.
The Azaria Chamberlain matinee jacket was found in the desert up in the Northern Territory. So that became the number one story around the country. We went from page 1 to page 10.
The paintings will be carefully packed and returned to the monastery at New Norcia for restoration.
All 26 paintings, in total said to be worth between $750,000 and $2 million, have been recovered. But nearly all have been damaged. John Mort for 7 National News.
Boy, I didn't think it was that bad.
The art theft or the hair?
Oh, the hair was pretty bad. We all had it. Big hair, Zapata moustache. Nearly a crime against humanity, I would think.
The restoration job is so awesome, the WA Art Gallery hasn't been able to give a commitment to the New Norcia mission that it will undertake the work.
The task of that restoration, and when you saw it up close, it was unbelievable.
Oh, shredded edges, torn, paint flaking off. You know, seriously in need of proper restoration. It was quite shocking to see.
How were the monks reacting to all of this?
They were ecstatic, yeah. I think their thoughts immediately turned to the restoration process because they knew it was going to be expensive and they didn't know how they were going to do it.
The community were shocked initially because the paintings had been with us for a long, long time.
And it's heartbreaking and confronting, absolutely.
Speaking personally, I don't have a great deal of ill feeling towards the thieves. My concern is the future and the restoration of the paintings.
On seeing the damaged art, I was angry for him and angry for the monks about the way it had been treated, and yet he was this very serene, peaceful, forgiving man.
The monks here believe God moves in mysterious ways. And although the art theft is seen as a disaster, it's also been an impetus for a $10 million plan to restore the old buildings and to develop facilities for the 20,000 tourists expected here each year.
When you drove away from New Norcia that day, filing your story, did you ever think those paintings would be found?
I always thought that the criminals who'd committed that crime would be caught. Every time I drive past, I think of the paintings, I think of the art theft, I think of Connie. It's such an unusual story. I mean, I don't think you could have made a movie out of it with any believability attached to it because it was so removed from any reality.
Oh, yeah, it was a cracker. It was a good story.
The whole thing is weird.
It was an investigation that really didn't have any blind alleys. We seemed to be lucky all the way through.
A great lesson to young would-be art thieves in what not to do.
So then, plot foiled, thieves arrested, paintings rescued. Are we done? Surely we're done.
No. No, I mean, the police might think it's done, but there's no way this is done. None of the questions have been answered. None of them.
There seems to be more here than what he's saying, and I don't know what that is.
Really, why did they do it? I still don't know the answer to that.
Look, I'm not a thief. I simply panicked.
I think you need to test the market first. I don't think you do it on speculation, not something of this nature. There needs to be an end result to go to that expense.
There has to be a buyer. The only way there will be a buyer for these artworks is if they were ordered before the theft.
First thing you'd ask is who would buy a 16th century European painting in Manila?
You know, some guy just ransacked the Spanish monastery and to take some old master paintings to the Philippines. Crazy, but 80s Manila was just a free-for-all.
So I could give you any photo and you can replicate it.
Mystery men, setups, this is dangerous business.
You need a person with a lot of money and a person who would be prepared to pay. And I think there's only one person that fits that bill.
I'm intrigued now.
OK, quick recap. We've got a 175-year-old Spanish monastery in the middle of the Western Australian wheat belt.
That incongruous building in the middle of nowhere.
The only abbey town in Australia.
It was a bit creepy.
You think, why would you build something out here like that?
Lots of European art.
The New Norcia Art Gallery prided itself on its collection.
Amongst others, there are several original Marattas, an original Bernini, and several other fine Italian works.
Some bumbling thieves.
Who then helped themselves to a selection of works in a most unceremonious manner, brutally hacked from their frames.
Well, the word desecration springs to mind.
The frames broken, the canvases ripped, the jagged edges of canvas still remaining in some of the frames. It was just a totally senseless act.
A cross-country police sting.
My partner suggested we're on a mission from God.
3 men from New South Wales have been charged with stealing the art collection.
Did either of them scream master criminal?
No way in the world. They had the intelligence on base speed hunt.
Thieves arrested, paintings rescued.
All 26 paintings have been recovered.
It had some sort of ideal of being a professional art heist, but in actual fact was just a bunch of idiots bumbling around and making it easy for the cops.
By November 1986, all 3 of our thieves were in this building here. This is the infamous Fremantle prison. As the mastermind, Bruce got a minimum of 3 years. Noel got 2.5. And Nigel, 1 year and 4 months. So, kind of finished, isn't it? If you were to sum up, like, the first thought that comes into your head.
OK, none of it makes sense.
Right. Which parts?
All of it.
Pamela James is an art historian and one of the foremost experts on art crime in Australia. Oh, these are the reference letters. So where do they go?
Oh, they're really... I think they're going to be really interesting.
OK, so they're over there. I've brought her in to try and make sense of the reams of documents we've collected in this case.
If I was giving a lecture on art crime, I would introduce this as the how not to.
So this is the example of how not to do a crime?
Well, this is extraordinary on so many levels. A, it's a collection in the back of Beyond. They then conduct what is probably the most inept removal. They don't just cut them from their frames, but they...
Slashed at will, leaving large sections of canvas in the frame.
But the next part of it, being picked up in the airline office...
They were bound for the Philippines.
...takes it into a whole other ballgame.
So it's interesting that you say none of it makes sense, because there's a version of this crime that is presented as being really straightforward.
Yeah, what's that?
OK, so you've got these 3 guys. Nigel, the used car salesman with a gambling habit.
Oi.
Noel, the former discotheque owner and recovering addict. And Bruce, the baker / chef / art crime mastermind.
You mean the 3 Stooges?
I mean, if you had to find 3 more unlikely people to carry out this crime, you couldn't really do better, could you?
Now, we know all 3 were convicted and jailed for the crime.
Guilty.
But each of them had a different story about what happened in New Norcia.
Nigel pretty much threw himself on the mercy of the court.
He had no ticker whatsoever. He threw his hands up very quickly.
And gave evidence against the others. I mean, that's not often you can get someone to do that, but he willingly did that.
Well, Nigel's evidence is that he met Bruce in a bar in Penrith.
We're both having a beer. You know how it is. You're just sitting there and then you start talking. Yeah, mate, so I'm absolutely fucked. I've got the banks after my home. Then, on top of that, I've got the bookies after me, and God knows what they're going to do if they get their hands on me. As I said before, absolutely fucked.
I might have a proposition for you, Nigel.
Bruce put the idea to Nigel that there was some money to be made, and he had the plans, he had the photographs.
These are all old master European paintings.
Yeah, whatever. What have I got to do with them?
And then he said,
You got to take them for me.
so I say, you know how much this is worth? 25. I say, nah, it's not worth it for that. Then he comes back with 50. I'm like, yeah, that sounds fair enough.
First of all, I really would have loved to have been a fly on the wall at that meeting. These must be very unusual men because they're able to share with one another quite quickly that they have dire personal circumstances over a period of a couple of beers. And not only that, actually organising an art heist on the other side of Australia.
According to Nigel, who was given $4,000 up front, flew over to New Norcia, absolutely choked, then went back to the East Coast. The second time, he went back with a buddy.
OK, now I've read about Noel. He's not the normal kind of buddy you'd choose to undertake criminal activity because according to the court records, he was absolutely ripped out of his mind most of the time.
Looking back, this wasn't a good time for me.
His health was terrible and he was on a recovery program using methadone. Unfortunately, when he arrived in Perth, he didn't have any methadone. So he was just living on these tranquilisers, eating them like peanuts.
Yeah, I was on Serapaks. I was taking, I don't know, 3 or 4 every 45 minutes. I'm dumbfounded. I just thought we were going to casino.
Several casinos in Sydney, which might have been closer.
You think?
Yeah, I think.
His strategy was too drugged out to know what he was doing.
I would really like to help you guys, but I just can't recall anything. I'm just dazed about the whole thing, you know?
He relied on that defence largely. He's had so many drugs that didn't really want to get involved.
But not enough that it stopped him being able to tie up and gag and drag this woman upstairs to a toilet.
Nigel and Noel, they steal the paintings.
Yep.
They come back to the East Coast. Nigel goes to Bruce. Bruce doesn't have all of his money. So Nigel keeps some of the paintings.
Fair enough.
The police capture Nigel. Nigel just completely splurges the whole story out. The police go to Bruce. When they get Bruce, they find the paintings. Well, it's done.
No. No, I mean, the police might think it's done, and they did have enough for a conviction, but there's no way this is done. None of the questions have been answered. None of them.
And the thing is, there is another version of the event. It's just that it's been rarely heard outside the courtroom.
Bruce.
Well, depending on who you talk to, he was either a victim or a mastermind.
He's the most intriguing and the most unlikely man in this trilogy.
Now, Bruce had an art reproduction business that involved taking photographs of racehorses and trotters and sending them over to the Philippines to be turned into oil paintings that he'd bring back and sell to the owners.
OK, now that bit's interesting, but what I found, I read somewhere here references that were given in court.
Here it is.
They all say there's this totally upright citizen, family man, hard-working, family business I've conducted over a long time. It just seems like a 39-year-old married man living in Warrimoo with his family. Why, Bruce, why does he do this?
Well, this is where it gets interesting, because it goes right back to when they found the paintings under Bruce's house.
Fucking Graham Bennett.
So who in all of this is Graham Bennett?
Ah, yes, mysterious Graham Bennett.
Bruce, he alleged he was commissioned by this Graham Bennett from the Philippines to get the paintings.
According to Bruce, he came across Bennett in a hotel in Manila, where the discussion turned to art reproduction.
We started talking and he mentioned that he was very interested in art, especially the old European masters. I mean, I was always looking for work, so I told him that my boys could knock him up a fine Rembrandt for $350.
But Bennett was looking for something more unique, less recognisable. So Bruce tells him, about the place he's heard of in Western Australia that has a treasure trove of old masters.
Okay, another one of these really extraordinary conversations. What do we know about Graham Bennett?
There is a description of him.
Oh.
Actually, do you want to read that?
Yep. Okay, what does Bennett look like?
He was a fella in his 50s.
He'd be about 5'6", fairly stocky build, hair thinning on top.
He was a good dresser, but is a bit loud for my taste. He had a lot of gold jewellery. Yeah, I distinctly remember he had rings with his initials in diamonds.
He looked like a sharp salesman type, I suppose.
Without being derogatory to salesmen, but he looked like he'd had a few too many good business lunches, I would have said.
So 7 months go by. It's Graham Bennett. He wants him to go to New Yorcia, take photos of these paintings that he's going to get replicated.
Why? It seems an awful long way to go to take photographs of something to be copied. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
And to be honest, neither does this next bit. Just stay with me here. Bruce goes to New Yorcia, takes the photos. Bruce brings them back to Bennett in Sydney. He's introduced to his associate, Nigel.
Ah, okay. So he pops up again.
But pretty soon, Graham Bennett says he doesn't want copies from photos anymore. He's got something else in mind.
And he's asking if my guys can paint from originals. I say, yeah, of course. Probably do a better job, actually. It'll cost you a little more. In fact, it'll cost you $500 each now.
A week later, Bruce gets a call from Nigel saying, hey, come pick up these paintings to be copied.
And these were the stolen ones?
Well, I mean, he says he didn't think that they were stolen.
I didn't want to know about them. As far as I was concerned, they were Graham Bennett's paintings.
It's only when he got them home.
Oh, shit. When I opened them, yeah, I knew straight away they were from New Yorcia. Fuck!
But he doesn't call the police.
Right.
Instead, he splits the collection in two, takes one half off to the Manila Airlines office.
Yeah.
And the other half under his house.
Look, I'm not a thief. I simply panicked. I should have called the police, but I didn't want to be implicated. So I pretended that
I didn't know what they were. Does that sound plausible to you?
No.
It was totally unconvincing. Nobody believed it. Everybody knew this was the defence trying to put reasonable doubt in there somewhere. I don't think you've been set up, mate. This is you. It's quite clear.
Well, the jury come back and found him guilty, so I didn't believe his story. He was involved, no doubt.
So, is there anything that backs up Bruce's theory about Graham Bennett?
Maybe. When the paintings were found in the Philippine Airlines offices, was there anything else with them?
I believe there was an envelope.
An open letter addressed to a person called Taylor, from memory.
Mike Taylor was an associate of his in Manila.
Bruce's partner in the art reproduction business and a hotel owner in Manila.
Is Mike Taylor still alive?
No, but we do have the letter. Do you want to read the letter?
I'd love to.
Oh,
yeah,
I've got it for you.
My word.
I've never seen this. Okay.
Oh, lovely, thank you.
Do you want me to read this out? Yeah. Dear Mike, enclosed are the paintings to be copied for Graham Bennett.
Get Al to do them because he does the best work and the guy is adamant that the copies are perfect. Aha.
Stuffed I know why he's so keen to have the replicas done, but he's willing to pay $500 each provided they're spot on. That's a lot of money then.
Also, it is most important that the reproductions are exactly the same size but leave enough border for reframing.
From what I could see of the originals when I was putting the extra wrapping on them, they seem very old. So, for Christ's sake, ask the boys to be careful, not to damage them, as they'll probably crack very easily. Yep, you got that right there, mate.
You shouldn't be laughing under such.
It would probably be a good idea to use a heavier gauge of canvas than usual.
As the stuff used in the originals feels like fucking lino.
Don't send them back when they are done.
The guy said to hold them there for him and he'll pick them up at the end of March.
I've got no way of contacting him, but I guess as long as we've got his paintings...
There's no way we can get screwed for the dough, Bruce.
Fascinating.
It's quite an intriguing piece of writing, isn't it?
It is. It shows us that Graham Bennett may well be a person. I think that gives some credence to the fact that it was being set up in Manila. Yeah, I do, having seen this.
He mentions Graham Bennett, but if he exists, I'd like to know where. We've made all the inquiries that we could here in New South Wales. On one occasion, on the way to Sydney, my partner and I went via Melbourne because there was somebody there that might have checked out as Graham Bennett, but didn't. So we made every effort to find this guy.
And what was Bruce saying about Graham Bennett?
He was never able to give any information. You would think if this person did exist and Bruce is wanting to cooperate or downplay his role in any way whatsoever, he could point us to the exact spot, but no, never happened.
So where do you think Graham Bennett comes from then?
I don't think he exists. Well, as far as we could find out, he doesn't exist.
Because there's an idea that perhaps Graham Bennett is completely fictitious.
I'll tell you why I don't think he is.
Okay.
The description of him is of details that most men would not make up.
Like what? What are you saying there?
Okay, so these things. Okay, so he wore a lot of gold jewellery. I remember he had a ring with his initials in diamonds. He looked like he'd had a few too many good business lunches. And that, to me, also means observation, not invention. Somebody who was making it up would have said, oh, he was a bit plump or overweight. Not. For me, that's a pretty complete picture of someone.
So why is it that nobody could find this Graham Bennett?
Well, maybe he's cleverer than the others.
Do you still feel like there's potentially more parties in this story that got away?
I think there had to be more parties involved, but probably not in Australia, but definitely overseas.
I think you need to test the market first. I don't think you do it on speculation, not something of this nature.
Okay.
You think about the logistics. Perth and New South Wales are a long way apart, and New South Wales and the Philippines are further apart. To organise something of that nature just takes a bit of planning, and there needs to be an end result to go to that expense.
What I can't work out with all of this is why Manila?
Look, there's no doubt if somebody wanted to take the effort to go back to the Philippines, that's where the answer is.
Well, when you put it like that... Welcome to Manila. The most densely populated city in the world. 40,000 people per square kilometre. It's a sea of humanity. Can you imagine a better place to hide the mystery behind a 40-year-old art crime?
Crime has always been the substrate of Philippine reality. All varieties of it, you can find it here.
So, where in all of this do we begin?
Excuse me. You wouldn't happen to know where I could find this building?
Okay.
Well, with Bruce. What links a mild-mannered ex-baker and a plot to traffic stolen paintings?
We know that Bruce had connections to the Philippines. The question is, how far do those connections stretch? Well, in addition to his art reproduction business, he was also part owner of a hotel.
It looks a little different these days, but the Hotel Mabuhay was situated in Omita in downtown Manila. It's where Bruce says he first met Graham Bennett, where his art reproduction business was run out of, and where the stolen paintings of New Norcia was supposed to end up. But what's also interesting about the Hotel Mabuhay is the address. It's a street with an entire art movement named after it.
When you say Mabini art, there are two things. The Mabini district, that area, was the site where a lot of tourist shops or souvenir shops were set The second is, I would say, school or tradition that started in the post-World War II years.
This is Boots Herrera, a leading art gallerist and curator.
Mabini art actually started when the artists following the modernist style broke away from the conservative school.
As modernist art became more and more popular, the conservatives, they felt left behind.
They felt that they were being marginalized in the annual art competitions. They were not winning the major prizes.
And so in 1955, at a National Art Prize exhibition, they revolted.
They walked out of the exhibition venue and set up their own exhibition on the streets. And the adjacent street is actually Mabini.
And so, Mabini art was born. Because what started as a street protest soon became a street market.
They had to find their own space, own audience, which they eventually did. But of course, it was very different. Artists had their studios there. Artists were dealing with the clients directly. And that became very popular.
And these would typically be artworks with subjects like the Manila sunset, the little nipa hut, or the Philippine straw cottage. These were the artists that refused to ride the modernist wave.
Butch Delise is a celebrated Filipino writer and Mabini art collector.
But when the 70s came and the American servicemen came and the market boomed, same subjects but much poorer quality, and the name Mabini itself became degraded into how it's appreciated today. Art that you could buy for a few dollars and say, I've been to the Philippines.
So it's very commercial, derivative in a way, because it is really more about what sells. It's really about the volume of works that you can produce.
10 of them a day, you know, one canvas lined up after another.
It actually served a specific community to decorate your house, to give us a gift. And so there is that demand. I think it continues to have a demand.
In the 70s and even the 80s, galleries littered the sidewalks here. These days, there are only shadows, vendors selling to tourists on the street, waiting to be moved on by police.
The old galleries are gone. You know, there's hardly any Mabini art anymore. And so even that has passed on into history.
Do you know, the thing about Mabini Street is, yes, it would have given Bruce access to galleries and potential buyers, but it's more than that. Mabini Street is filled with artists, right? These are artists who are highly trained in reproductions and potentially forgeries. The idea that there were paintings, you know, being smuggled into Manila, does that surprise you at all?
Well, actually, no, because I've heard of similar stories.
Manila was rife with crime. Up until this day, we have a thriving market in forgeries.
A community of artists somewhere in the Philippines make a living out of making copies.
Factories, warehouses, producing Philippine art fakes. Stupid me, despite all my presumed scholarship and so on, fell for one of these, for the age-old reason of greed.
But what about 17th century paintings from a bush monastery? Mabini Street is not what it once was. But if you know where to look, you can still find painters with a connection to that past.
Ay yung paggawa ng religious, naging pagko natin, naging misyon. Hindi, ito kasi ang binigay na misyon eh. Yan ang hinihingi ko. Tapos, siyempre, ito tuloy ko na yung misyon ko. Yung misyon ko, magpinta, nilagay ako sa simbahan. Ako si Eladio Santos. The last artist ng Mabini.
Eladio makes a living as a portrait and mural artist.
I'm 13 years old when I'm starting the drawing. And then I like to... Gusto kong maiba yung buhay ko. Pumunta ako dito sa Ermita. Dito maraming pintor. Dami ako naging kaibigan. Pagkatapos yun nga, aral ako ng aral. Paano kasi hindi ako nag-aral eh. Ano lang ako, sa mga libro. Pero ako, gumaya ako sa mga master. Sila Rembrandt, yung mga old master na mga artist. Kaya yun ang pinag-umpisahan ko.
So how does it work? I could give you any photo and you can replicate it.
Kahit anong picture na magagawa ko.
Can you tell me a bit about this painting? Has anyone ever asked you to do a reproduction of this picture before?
Meron na.
I always order my husband and then I hang 3 days sold.
Wow, that's fast.
A lot of people saying that's a gift from the God because he's a good man.
This is a family operation. Eladio's wife, Lorna, runs a small gallery selling his and other artists' work.
So, what was Mabini Street like back then?
Life is good, easy money, because here is open, beer garden, drink.
Yeah.
Lot of Japanese people come, American. It's different country is in Mabini.
Were there lots of artists that could do this kind of work back then?
Many. Yes, different picture from the books or picture. Example, like Rembrandt, that's my favorite. I always order to my husband. And then put name Santos, not Rembrandt. Rembrandt will go in the jail.
So you have to sign as yourself. Those are the rules.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, that's the rule. And then Santos, not Rembrandt, Santos.
Just to be clear, Eladio is no forger. But the question is, were there painters here capable of forging the New Norcia collection?
I'd like to show you some photos. Could you do replicas of those pictures? Yeah.
Kamukha nito, religious painting. Madaling gumawa nito, kahit sinong pintor nakakagawa nito, basta't nakakagawa ng portrait, nagagawa to. Basta't may bayad, gagawin niya.
Would there have been people in Mabini Street at that time capable of doing high-quality copies of those artworks?
Well, I think yes, because the industry of making copies was already part of the Mabini art community.
Sa Ermita, pagka mabilis kang gumawa, money maker ang tawag sa'yo.
Oh, yes. I mean, no doubt, just on the technical level, whether for legitimate purposes or otherwise.
Nung maraming pintor dito, kahit ginagawa eh. Pag mapagkukwartahan, gagawin.
I mean, making copies was a tradition in the training of fine artists, in the academic tradition. And that's the origin of the word master's copy. If you can copy your master, you're a good artist. So master's piece, you're able to copy your master's piece.
And for me, it remains a strong possibility that somewhere out there was still some old man who would have had the skills to do this.
But being able to copy paintings is one thing. Stealing them, that's a different story altogether.
Would somebody have actually needed the originals to do copies of those artworks?
To be honest, no. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Why didn't they take a picture of it and get someone up there to copy it?
I'm very suspicious about it.
For me, on reflection, is a cover.
Is it possible, plausible, that Bruce is just a mule? Like this guy that had the right connections in the Philippines?
Yeah. Apart from the Manila link, He has none of the kind of background, of experience, of criminal credibility that would be able to pull off any of this.
That's out of his league. If he had to get those paintings to Manila and sold to international buyers, that's not his league. This guy takes photographs of horses and gets them turned into oil paintings.
Also, for an art crime to be successful, for any money to be made, they have to be able to move it on. There has to be a buyer. The only way there will be a buyer for these artworks is if they were ordered before the theft.
Well, there is a theory.
Art experts have begun assessing the damage to a $3 million collection of paintings stolen in Western Australia 2 weeks ago.
The paintings, some almost 300 years old, were found at homes in Sydney's western suburbs. A number were also located at an airline office. They were bound for the Philippines.
I think there had to be more parties involved, but probably not in Australia, but definitely overseas.
Someone set up the buy in Manila. It was basically stolen on commission.
First thing you'd ask is who would buy a 16th century European painting in Manila?
Oh, I don't think it'd be very hard to work out. The paintings should never have been seen on the open market. They'd be too identifiable. You need a person with a lot of money and a person who would be prepared to pay. And I think there's only one person that fits that bill, and that will be President Marcos.
Inside Malacanang Palace, President Marcos still sits on his throne.
Do you think the paintings were going to President Marcos in the Philippines?
That's my view.
We heard it several times that they were possibly going to Ferdinand Marcos, who was the president of the Philippines at the time. Now, I've got no evidence to that effect, but it was certainly a rumour.
Does it not seem strange to you that artworks in a tiny corner of Western Australia have been stolen to order for the most powerful family in the Philippines?
Absolutely bizarre. Certainly Imelda Marcos was somebody who liked to make a show. Money was no object.
You know, that doesn't surprise me.
Why not?
Because they were as grubby as the blokes that did the heist.
Right.
Seriously.
Logically, you think somebody wants them. I can't see them going on the open market anywhere without someone being found out. A private collector somewhere was going to have them. Now, whether that was Ferdinand Marcos or somebody else, who knows?
What you'd have to do is actually find out, A, whether Marcos is buying paintings. If so, what kind of paintings were they buying? And by looking at that, you'd be able to get an idea of whether these sorts of paintings fit into the Marcos collection genre.
Which brings me, of all places, to London. Specifically, a warehouse in Woolwich.
Hey. Nice to meet you. Come in. Sure.
I've come to meet an artist, a Filipino living here in London who, for 10 years, has been researching what he calls
the Marcos loot. I'm sure a lot of you will know it by the shoes, but, you know, Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos were the conjugal dictators of the Philippines from 1965 to 1986. And over that period, they were able to amass roughly around $10 billion of ill-gotten wealth.
You heard that right. $10 billion US.
The Marcoses were the biggest thieves in the history of modern politics. You know, they were experts in, transforming public wealth into private property.
At this point, it's probably time for a little history lesson.
A national figure for over 40 years, he was a brilliant scholar, sportsman and lawyer. When he came to power, he and his handsome family rivaled the Kennedys of Camelot.
So the Marcoses came into power in '65.
Under threat of defeat by Benigno Aquino in 1972, he proclaimed martial law.
Martial law was the defining event of my generation. This literally changed our lives.
Martial law gave the Marcoses near total power over the media, the Senate, banks, industry, pretty much the entire economy.
It went to such ridiculous lengths as making sure that people had short hair and coming home before 10 at night because there was a curfew.
De facto dictatorship, but he called it, what did he call it? Constitutional authoritarianism.
Do you see yourself as a dictator?
No, a forceful leader, yes. In the sense that I live by a certain fighting faith, and I stick to this fighting faith.
And so for most of the 70s, they were able to get away with what they were trying to get away with, which is industrial scale corruption. There's a phrase that gets thrown about a lot recently, even when it comes to politics here in the UK. But actually, that phrase, crony capitalism, was coined specifically to talk about the form of capitalism that was taking place when the Marcoses were in power.
And for many around the world, there was an embodiment for all that wealth and extravagance.
Still adored by many, she'll throw her watch to the crowd.
How would you go about describing Imelda Marcos?
Imelda fashioned herself as royalty, as a queen, and she was regarded as such. In the Philippines, literally she had the crown jewels. She had the big bouffant hairdo. She always had, glittery gems, and she always wore the Philippine national costume. A living, breathing sculpture of excess.
How would that have compared to the life of the average Filipino back then?
I think there isn't even a scale to really put that into perspective.
They call this place Smoky Mountain.
Just how many people earn their living like this in the Philippines is anyone's guess. Certainly, it's in the millions.
More than 60%, some would even say 70% of the Filipinos live below poverty line.
It's the theft of the future of generations of Filipinos. And so a huge part of this project was how do you unpack that 10 billion?
Over 10 years of exhibits, PO has catalogued the Marcoses' loot, reconstructing their correspondence, furniture, art collection, and wardrobe, even 3D printing their jewellery.
And instead of describing the objects as they are, we'd label it with what it could have bought. 2 of Imelda's pearl studs is the equivalent to the annual income of 15 Filipinos. A pink diamond would have been able to finance 2 domestic airports. A sapphire necklace, could have paid for thousands of pneumonia vaccines. Imelda's genius is that she manages to transform herself into this comical, auntie figure, right? She's this crazy aunt that, is just outrageous.
But there is a scale to this loot that not even PO can truly represent. To understand it, we're going to head to the other side of the Atlantic.
I think they saw New York as the capital of the world, and that they had to be part of it, that they had to be seen in it, and be seen as not just rich people from a third world country, but rich people from New York. So this is the Trump building now, but if you go inside, talk to the doorman or the receptionist, some of them might still remember that it was the Marcos building. It was purchased by Ferdinand Marcos as a gift to Imelda Marcos on her birthday in the 1980s. With 3 other buildings in Manhattan, one on 5th Avenue, Crown Building, another in Herald Square, and still another building on Madison Avenue. Between 50 to 70 million for each building. This one was for about $70 million.
And yes, that is 1980s prices.
Four buildings for a birthday. Yep. The Marcoses were the biggest thieves in the history of modern politics. They were able to amass roughly around $10 billion of ill-gotten wealth.
Remember that this wasn't just stealing from the public coffers. This involved bribery, this involved extortion from foreign investors, this involved stealing taxpayers' money, as well as profits from crony-owned corporations. Doing that in the middle of famine and death in the Philippines. So this was extravagance at its most cruel.
Ruben Carranza is a human rights lawyer
and a former chairman of the PCGG.
Is the Presidential Commission on Good Government tasked to investigate and recover ill-gotten wealth acquired by the Marcoses and their cronies during the dictatorship.
Much of it was obtained in the 15 years of martial law in the Philippines. Years where Amnesty International estimates there was more than 3,000 extrajudicial killings, at least 35,000 documented tortures.
I underwent some, I suppose it could be torture, but I mean, it was nothing compared to what my comrades went through. And I lost a lot of friends.
I had a friend, a Filipino priest, who was abducted, has never been seen again, and you could see the bodies, both those that were found and those that were never found, mount during the dictatorship.
You know, let's talk about the shiny things, not the 34,000 people being tortured, not the 3,270 people who were killed. Let's talk about the shoes, not about the dead bodies. The shoes actually become a really, really good smokescreen to hide the actual plunder. It was in the 80s that the reality of their crimes were beginning to catch up.
In the Philippines, a nation is praying for justice.
In August '83, an exiled politician named Ninoy Aquino, the political opposition, returned to the Philippines after being exiled. And as he was walking down the steps of his plane, he was shot in the head and assassinated. And that, I think, woke people up.
And his wife, Corrin Aquino, began leading a people power movement.
It felt like a powder keg. The atmosphere was positively feverish.
It is the power of the people that is manifesting itself now.
We responded immediately and came out in droves, bringing our whole families.
I think the world witnessed a scale of protesting that hadn't been seen in a very long time.
We knew that something was going to break one way or another. Either we were going to die or Marcos was going to leave.
And so years of repression, years of corruption, and years of economic crises finally led to a revolution.
People power had brought them to the home of presidential power, and now no one would hold them back for long.
People's power has triumphed. A truly popular, near bloodless revolution has toppled a dictator.
They were whisked away from Malacanang Palace on US Army helicopters, and they were exiled in Hawaii.
They packed hundreds of boxes and luggage, took jewelry, took cash.
That's not to say they didn't leave anything behind.
Meanwhile, some of the world's poorest invaded the palace to see what was left behind.
Just the amount of stuff. It was like a decrepit department store that had been left to rot.
500 dresses, a bulletproof bra.
And then there were those shoes. Was it true that you had 3,000 pairs of shoes in the palace?
I never made a count.
There was also art, lots of it.
So I just want to show you, a couple of things. I mean, it's a bit laid out like an art crime cooking show, but yeah, so these are, this is an auction catalogue from a sale of old master paintings in 1991. So it's a collection that used to be owned by Imelda Marcos. One part is, these are the paintings that were left behind in the presidential palace. The other half, which are actually the better quality old master paintings, were found in a yacht in Cannes, owned by the Saudi arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi.
You have done a great job as a nation, led by the great Marcos and Mrs. Marcos.
Who have done these paintings?
I mean, it's a crazy collection of artists. It goes from like Michelangelo to, I think there's a Titian, there is a Tintoretto, there's an El Greco painting. The history of the art history is contained within that criminal document.
Are they real?
Well, that's the interesting thing. So if you look at the auction catalogue, there is a disclaimer on every single page.
Why would they not vouch for the authenticity of these paintings from the Marcos collection?
Because in the true vein of conspicuous consumption, Imelda wasn't a connoisseur. She was a consumer.
She would buy fake paintings and not care. She actually knowingly purchased fake works of art for high prices that were ridiculous if you knew they were fake.
Authenticity is not really a concern. It's more like creating a stage set, you know, in the sense that she had a dinner that might be like, I don't know, might have Italian food. So she'd go to a gallery and go, right, I need some pastoral paintings by Italian artists tonight.
Really?
So things would have been bought en masse rather than individually.
Quantity, not quality, seemed to matter to her when it came to art.
So there was a high demand for just
stuff.
Can I show you something? So this is the reporting of the initial theft at New Norcia.
The New Norcia Art Gallery prided itself on its collection. Described as possibly the best private collection in the Southern Hemisphere, the gallery housed many rare pieces, including works by Raphael, Murillo and Titian.
2 men destroyed that collection in just 40 minutes.
Paintings, some dating back to the early 16th century, were brutally hacked from their frames. The bigger paintings, and size was no object, were slashed out on the spot.
And they grabbed me and mugged me and took me upstairs.
3 men from New South Wales have been charged with stealing the art collection.
A number were also located at an airline office. They were bound for the Philippines.
Does any of that surprise you?
That they would send the paintings to Manila at a time of turmoil. But then again, perhaps it's a time of turmoil that might be the best occasion to sell stolen paintings.
I can imagine why someone would think this was a good idea.
Why? Tell me more.
You know, some guy just ransacked the Spanish monastery and to take some old master paintings to the Philippines. Crazy, but 80s Manila was just a free-for-all. When the Marcos government was in, you know, teetering on the edge of collapse, it was just so many contexts of corruption happening.
First thing you'd ask is who would buy a 16th century European painting in Manila?
So we've been told that they were stolen with an intent to put them into the Marcos collection in the Philippines. Is that crazy?
Whoever picked these paintings up and brought them to Manila would have had that in mind.
I can say things here that'll knock the socks off all of you guys. You guys got to know the truth.
Can you hold that side for me?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow, oh, wow. Oh, wow!
This would have to be done by an organized group, a syndicate, because this obviously takes planning and financing.
We just honestly didn't know they were that valuable.
So they thought, gosh, they're worth a fortune in Renaissance masterpieces or whatever in WA.
They got away with it. They got away with it. Fucking cruel.
In the grand scheme of crimes committed at New Norcia, this doesn't even come close to the worst.
No, absolutely not. And we should never forget that.
So, this has been, you know, crazy so far. Let's go back through the numbers.
This all starts with a 175-year-old Catholic monastery.
Then there's the 26.
Paintings, some dating back to the early 16th century.
Stolen by 2, well, let's call them unlucky thieves.
I mean, these people were morons, absolute morons.
Shit. The frames broken, the canvases ripped, the jagged edges of canvas still remaining in some of the frames.
Throw in an unconvincing mastermind.
Bruce was the bloke who hired me to go to Perth to get the paintings. He's the one who organised the whole thing.
He was either a victim or a mastermind.
He's the most intriguing and the most unlikely man in this trilogy.
As far as I was concerned, they were Graham Bennett's paintings.
So who in all of this is Graham Bennett?
Bruce, he alleged he was commissioned by this Graham Bennett from the Philippines.
If he exists, I'd like to know where.
Maybe he's cleverer than the others.
A plot to traffic the paintings to Manila.
Did you say Manila?
I did.
They were actually going to try to ship them to Manila.
What I can't work out with all of this is why Manila?
And finally, one big rumour.
So you think the paintings were going to President Marcos in the Philippines?
That's my view.
Got no evidence to that effect, but it was certainly a rumour.
You know, that doesn't surprise me.
Why not?
Because they were as grubby as the blokes that did the heist.
Right.
Seriously.
So we've been told that they were stolen with an intent to put them into the Marcos collection in the Philippines. Is that crazy?
It seems so bizarre, but that's the thing. Sometimes, you know, truth is stranger than fiction, right?
In a corner of the University of the Philippines sits the Vargas Gallery. It's home to some of Imelda Marcos's art collection. It's not the really valuable stuff. Most of that has either been sold off or, in some cases, still missing. Instead, this is some of what was left behind when the Marcoses fled Manila back in '86.
The Marcoses had money to burn.
The decision to acquire those paintings were more based on how it would reflect on her as a collector.
There is a demand for kitsch. There is a demand for things that appear historical. There is a demand for looking civilized while doing uncivilized things.
So could our stolen paintings have ended up in a collection like this? Yeah, absolutely. Because look around. You've got Italian Renaissance paintings, you've got Yugoslavian folk art, there's Russian Orthodox icons here. They didn't just collect things, they collected everything because they could.
I would understand why someone would think that there is a market for these works.
Presented in the right manner, with the right price, why not?
You need a person with a private museum, you need a person with a lot of money, and a person who would be prepared to pay.
Mrs. Marcos was known to be a buyer of fine art, and I'm sure that whoever picked these paintings up and brought them to Manila would have had that in mind. I mean, she would be the #1 possible buyer here.
So, there's no doubt that the Marcos family had the money, the power, and the art collection. But for all of the things that might fit, there are some big things that don't.
Here, Mrs. Marcos reels off famous names like Botticelli, Michelangelo, and points to where they're hung on her walls.
Imelda Marcos prided herself in publicly acquiring art.
Imelda might buy bad work, but she bought it from New York.
She would buy fake paintings from galleries. She wasn't buying fake paintings from some, black market.
Oh, magnificent.
This is a room.
Imelda Marcos also wanted to display works of art that she bought. It would have been difficult for her to display paintings that had just been stolen from Australia a few months earlier.
And there's also an issue with timing.
86 is rather late in the day for the Marcoses to be buying art.
Because in January 1986, while thieves were ransacking the New Norcia monastery, Ferdinand Marcos was staring down a revolution.
First few months of 1986, the atmosphere was positively feverish. It felt like a powder keg.
And by February, when the paintings were found in Sydney, Manila was on the brink of a full-scale revolution.
The final hours of the Marcos regime began just after noon yesterday.
There's so many mad, crazy stories that come out of the Marcoses' decades in power. Like, all of them stranger than fiction. I can imagine why someone, like a small-time crook in Australia, would think this is the perfect environment to sell these paintings. But I think that's too clean a story.
These people, I think, had other priorities in mind, like saving Ferdinand Marcos medically and politically.
The Marcos family declined to be part of this documentary, but their story certainly doesn't end in 1986.
Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos in forced exile in Hawaii. The strong man of the Philippines and his iron butterfly may need a miracle to take them back home to their Filipino paradise lost.
Imelda might appear as a kind of trivial figure, but she's incredibly knowing.
Tell me, what do you think history's judgment will be on you?
I know eventually history will be kind to me.
They were both charged in New York for racketeering and corruption, influence. He died before the trial could begin. And the prosecutor in the United States wasn't ready to prosecute Imelda Marcos.
Her lawyers argued that although she did spend the money, she knew nothing about her husband's business deals.
And this prosecutor, of course, we now know isn't exactly the best lawyer to have. He's Rudy Giuliani.
Imelda celebrated her acquittal by crawling on her knees down the aisle of St. Patrick's Cathedral.
And that kind of set the stage for this gradual return to power.
After 5 years in exile, Imelda returned.
She's now an elected member of the Congress and ran for president 4 years ago, getting 10% of the vote.
Eventually setting the stage for Bongbong Marcos, or Ferdinand Marcos Jr., to become president in May 2022.
We will go farther together than against each other, pushing forward, not pulling each other back.
I was just bowled over by the absurdity of the turn our history has taken.
The reason they call it a revolution is because at the end of it, you find yourself right back where you started.
This isn't about the past. This is about the present. And of course, it's a present where another Marcos is in power.
Bongbong won in a landslide. And a year into his presidency, he enjoys very high approval ratings. As for Imelda, well, at 94, she's still infamous. But she's also just very famous.
So you painted for Imelda?
Yeah. Mabait si Imelda. Si Imelda, mahilig sa art. Tapos nag-people power sa Malacanang. Galit na galit yung mga tao eh. Ni-ransack, sinira yung painting. Kaya ngayon, si Bongbong ang presidente, 3 portrait na yung ginawa ko kay Bongbong.
It hasn't stopped. The theft of the Marcoses continues to dictate how Filipinos live their lives. Their wealth was what they used to, to change history through social media. It's not just about money. It's about the future of entire generations and how Filipinos see themselves.
So, where does that leave us?
Okay, oh boy, Mark, I'm dying to hear about your adventures. I want to know what you found.
I don't reckon the Marcoses did it. I don't reckon they were involved. Like, I'm not saying they weren't capable of it, but if you look at the timeline, there's just so much going on for them in early 1986.
Yeah, well, yeah, there was. But I don't think that was the Marcoses directly. I don't think it was ever going to be directly the Marcoses. I think it had to be either an art dealer or somebody who had, in the past, been able to flog them out. I mean, there was going to be an intermediary, I'm sure.
I do think we found the community that Bruce was going to use to actually do the replica.
How?
They had this street called Mabini Street, right? And so on Mabini Street were all of these artists.
So these are people who are copyists. This is a community, a guild, if you like, of copyists.
I think that's where Bruce was going.
So then what did you do?
As an experiment, we got them to see if they could do a replica of one of the paintings.
Oh, this is too good. Yeah, and?
You want to see it?
Yeah, I do. I do. I do.
All right, I'm going to caveat this. We only gave him 1 day.
OK, so we're talking quite good copyists.
Okay. Can you hold that side for me?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That is amazing. What's immediate apparent to me that says this is modern is the brushstrokes. See, that's a bit, how's your father? This is a rush job. But it does show you that they'd be absolutely capable.
Having seen this now,
yeah.
Do you think there was an actual plan to copy these paintings?
Yeah, I do. I do. It's confounding, but I think what they were trying to do is double dip.
Fence the paintings and get extra money from copies?
Yeah. I mean, we know that there was a letter instructing them to do so.
Dear Mike, enclosed are the paintings to be copied for Graham Bennett. The guy is adamant that the copies are perfect.
I'm stuffed if I know why he's so keen to have the replicas done.
But he's willing to pay $500 each, provided they're spot on.
This is what's needed. This is what the client requires. Obviously, there was a plan to sell them to someone. When you read the court transcripts, you have to think there is someone else pulling the strings, because if you look at Bruce's evidence...
Graham Bennett was a chap that I met in the hotel in the Philippines in '85. He was very interested in art, especially the old European masters.
The so-called Graham Bennett had said in a conversation in the pub in Manila, people love to have old European art on their walls. You can't have a Mona Lisa on your wall. You've got to have something that's not well documented and that people don't know. These works absolutely fit that criteria. So if we don't have the Marcoses, who was the client?
I wonder if they just thought that they could get it into, if not the Marcoses regime, then certainly...
The church?
Well, the Marcoses universe.
Can you see a market for these paintings outside of the Marcoses themselves?
Yes, yes, the cronies.
Now that is a term that even today you still hear a lot in the Philippines.
The phrase is crony capitalism.
Ill-gotten wealth acquired by the Marcoses and their cronies during the dictatorship.
The small clique of the president's friends, the crony capitalists as they're called.
It refers to the business leaders, landowners and friends of the Marcoses who profited from the decades of the regime's power and corruption.
Many of them were new rich, thanks to Mr. Marcos, and did collect art.
It's entirely possible that within the Marcos circle, you had contacts and connections with people who stole and trafficked in stolen luxurious goods.
This is not your usual item for the Philippine art market. But given that its subject is religious, that would look good in any Filipino matron's wall or near her altar. It would scream sanctity.
Criminality was rampant in various parts of society. When everyone is literally in power to take what they can get, it becomes really difficult to work out whose intentions were whose, you know? I think that's how it would end up in Manila, not as a result of a specific crime, but as a result of a political situation that actually rewards crime.
Like I told you, we're better to hide the mystery behind a 40-year-old art crime.
There had to be more parties involved, no doubt. I think there was other people involved overseas.
Had they made it over to the Philippines, would there have been appetite to send you or New South Wales Police over to the Philippines to continue the chase?
I'd like to think there would have been, but I don't know. I think it's unlikely.
Because you've got jurisdictional issues and you've got to go through Attorney Generals, and the state of New South Wales doesn't have that jurisdiction.
If those paintings had been flown to Manila, I'm certain we never would have seen them again. No, we wouldn't have got them back.
But they did. They found the paintings, they caught the thieves, well, some of them anyway. And the rest, as they say, is history. The reality is, I don't think we'll ever know exactly where those stolen paintings were really going. But what I can tell you is more about the place where those paintings came from.
The history of that building is intriguing, it's tragic, it's not widely known, but it is part of New Norcia's story and it can't be ignored.
It'd be just a whole lot nicer if we just tore it down.
A long time ago as a child in the mission, oh how I cried when I was told that God and the devil will always be by my side. I tried and I tried to be a good little Nyungar boy, but these religious people keep insisting I see God the devil with me.
If you're telling the story of New Norcia, what do you think is the most important thing people should know about that place?
About what happened there to the kids.
And to understand that, we need to go back to the beginning.
So 1846, the first people arrived there. At the beginning, they were following the moving groups of the Ued language people and other Noongar people. They were here to expand the Catholic Church and to do it the way it did it in 1846, which was get rid of the culture you're in, make it a European culture. We're going to Christianise these people.
New Norcia's founder, Dom Rosendo Salvado, was no ordinary monk. He was a celebrated pianist, became a well-respected bushman, and above all else, had very different ideas about the Indigenous people of Western Australia.
He would be sort of like a liberal for his time. He began the process whereby marriage became normalised among Indigenous people, and he felt responsible for those under his care. At that time, this was protection.
He wanted to save them, through the Catholic Church. My grandfather at that time, because, it was open warfare, it was legal to shoot Aboriginals in that era, And I think Bishop Salvado saved him.
It developed greatly. They settled, they had farms, they had water supplies, doctors, teachers, all of those sorts of things. They began schooling.
In 1858, St Mary's Aboriginal Boys Mission was founded at New Norcia. 3 years later, the St Joseph's Girls Mission was opened.
He brought them towards European behaviour. That's what he was intending to do, because in his mind, European behaviour and Christian behaviour, well, they were the same thing. But there was a good relationship, it seems, between him and the people he helped. Certainly when he died, there was great emotion among the people, the Indigenous people, so he was valued, they liked him, there was a relationship.
After Salvado came the Italian abbot, Torres. And under Torres, New Norcia expanded. 2 colleges were built for the children of white farmers, and Spanish-speaking nuns brought in as educators.
When an abbot changes in an abbey, policy changes. That then turned much towards the idea of control of Indigenous people, and this was also West Australian policy. There was a specific policy of identifying children of Indigenous people, particularly half-caste children, and these were, under law, to be detained and then transferred to homes and reservations, and New Norcia was one of those centres.
100 years ago, a Spanish mission father left Perth, the capital of Western Australia, to bring Christianity to Australian Aborigines. His ideal of teaching is carried on in the mission's several colleges. There is a primary school where Spanish priests teach Aboriginal boys in an atmosphere of friendly encouragement. Spanish nuns care for the Aboriginal girls. New Norcia joins the past and the present, a bit of old Spain in a new Australia.
Is that how you remember it?
No. No.
All bullshit. Nothing like that. Nothing.
Is it a safe place for kids?
Then?
Yeah.
Kevin Barron grew up in a family of 8. When his parents separated in the 1950s, he and his siblings were sent to New Norcia.
So the welfare came in. They call them the native welfare them days. They call them a different name now. Put us in the ute, and away we went to New Norcia. My sister was 4-year-old, Val. She said to me, "Where are we going, brother?" I couldn't answer that question. The girls were put over to St. Joseph's, and I was put in St. Mary's. I cried for a while, thinking, why did it happen to somebody else instead of happening to us, to our family? But everybody does that, I suppose. They took away our childhood and our sense of belonging. We were just trash. There's a name they used to call us Copper Emerita.
What does that mean?
Rubbish. Shit. Good for nothing.
Ugly little black devil, never gonna make it in life. Those were the things that was all given to us as children in the missions. Ugly little black devil's never gonna make it in life. Drink yourself to death.
Alf Taylor is a writer and poet who's written extensively about his childhood at the mission.
Every time I saw a book, my little heart would go boom, 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 boom. There was a photo of William Shakespeare, and I looked at him and I said, oh my God, he's got to be the ugliest man I ever seen. He's ugly, I am ugly, I must be related to See, but the writing saved me, the pencil saved me. Like I said, it wasn't for that pencil, I'd have been gone a long time ago. Yeah.
Alf was just 5 when he was taken to New Norcia.
What's your earliest memory of New Norcia?
My father, all his family, they went through New Norcia. I felt like I was going back to the places I belonged. It's when I woke up next morning. I actually thought I woke up in hell. I've always longed for the bush that I see, but I keep hearing, God, the devil, and me. All I want is to be free, free from this mission. With my mother, I want to be. Even today as a man, I can still hear and see those terrible words, God and the devil with me.
She couldn't read or write much, but what she took is awesome, what she captured.
Dallas Phillips grew up on farming land at Goomalling, about an hour's drive from New Norcia. Her mother was an amateur photographer who captured their life in the years before she was sent to the mission.
See, Mum and Dad, they were bushies. We were rich out on the farm. Honestly, we were rich. Good, clean upbringing, lots of love. We didn't have that with the nuns, but for my family, we had that. 7 of us went to New Norcia. Oh, it was ugly big place because I never seen a big place like that. It was frightening. To see these big buildings, walking into them big doors. We were to be educated. That was my understanding of being taken to New Norcia, to make me a better person for the world. But it was all lies. It was lies.
What do you think you learnt from New Norcia?
Well, how to watch my back, I think. There was nothing, you know.
We worked. We were always hungry. It was like a bloody slave labour.
You knew you were going to get some sort of a punishment.
Like the nuns used to beat the living daylights out of us, the priests used to flog us.
Sometimes they'd cut your hair, shave your head, you know.
There was a corner next to the mess. You sit down over your hands out like this here, on your knees, facing the corner. And after a while, you sit there for a while, your arms get tired and you go down. And all of a sudden, there's whack, back up again.
And how long would you have to stay like that?
As long as they wanted you.
Fucking cruel.
What about your culture? Were you free to kind of talk your own language?
No. That's the devil's talk, you know, you shouldn't say that.
If you boys speak in your Aboriginal tongue or talk about your Aboriginal culture, God is coming down from heaven and sending you all to hell. No more you'll see your mums and dads.
Use it again, look out. You'll get this.
I just like yesterday, I can still hear it. What little I knew about my Aboriginal culture, my Aboriginal language, out the window, shut the window down.
Often, the children were also cut off from their families.
It was hard. I could not communicate with my sisters. They used to have bars up there before, and both places, St. Joseph's and St. Mary's.
My father, he died when I was in the mission. So I was about 12, 13 or something. Father Basil walked past and he said, we were all in the kitchen, and he said, right, Taylor, your father has just died. If you don't do those dishes properly, I'm going to flog you. So we started washing the dishes, you know. That was it. I never went to his funeral, you know.
Did you ever get a chance to grieve for your dad?
No. We weren't supposed to feel grief. Only the time we felt grief is when Jesus Christ was hung on the cross over Easter. That was it.
When Alf was 15, he ran away from New Norcia, and after 10 years apart, he finally found his mother.
You know, that was like going back into heaven, just meeting her again, you know.
What had they told your mum about you?
They used to tell her that I died in an mission somewhere. See, it was normal for us to go through that at that particular time. I mean, the world got to know this. Everyone's got to know it.
It was part of a program which was national and statewide, and of course the whole of Australia was doing this. The missionaries as well assisted in this, teachers assisted in it, medical staff assisted in it, identifying children who were half-caste of Aboriginal women and making sure those half-caste children were taken away. Even the word half-caste is hard to say, but that's how they spoke.
A white man could come and look at a fair-skinned Aboriginal kid, grab him, take him to the police station, and the sergeant will check his skin colour, then put him in the cell and write out a receipt in pound, shillings and pence, give it to him.
It's like a bounty.
Exactly. It was in those days then. It wasn't only the nuns, it was all, you know, all the white people, the governments and all that. That's all they had for us.
This was under law in Western Australia. They were to be removed, and the aim was to get rid of the Aboriginal, to breed it out and to make everybody white.
We were just abos, and they didn't really give a, you know, horse's rear end about us.
Of course it meant money, and it meant land, and it meant the ability to keep their monastery running and working, because there were all sorts of contracts for education, for all of those sorts of things. I think you do have to say that there was a benefit to the monastery in taking part of Indigenous policies in Western Australia. Yeah.
You wouldn't treat an animal like that, the way we got treated sometimes. And we're supposed to be state wards of the state. I think the pigs had better than us.
They used and abused my people.
Not only was New Norcia publicly funded, but it was also publicly celebrated. And yet, in testimonies, in inquiries, court cases, as well as countless oral and written histories, there is evidence of decades of systemic violence, neglect, cruelty, and abuse at New Norcia.
I tried to erase it from my mind, you know, but it's impossible. It's with me all the time.
When you left, you were broken.
A child does not forget. It stays with you. That's my experience.
The isolation, the cruelty, you know. They destroyed a race, you know.
As a child, Dallas was sexually abused at New Norcia, as well as years before by a Catholic priest in her hometown.
Oh, I hated the fucking place. Hated it, because this mud's hurting me, and then we're in the church and in a confession box with this creature that's hurt you.
Dallas was one of the thousands of survivors who gave evidence in the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sex abuse.
In 2013, it started a major investigation with very strong legal powers of religious bodies and secular institutions all across Australia that had to do with children. That's where the Catholics, Anglicans, Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, secular orphanages, all of these things were investigated to find out what the hell had been going on and why these abuses had taken place and why weren't they being dealt with.
The conjunction of events which the Royal Commission has examined can only be described as a national tragedy.
Police often refused to believe children. Child protection agencies did not listen to children. They did not act on their concerns, leaving them in situations of danger.
When you've been sexually abused, it's never the same.
The Commission's report found that from the 1950s to the 1970s, 21% of priests at New Norcia were accused of child sexual abuse. That is 3 times the rate of other Catholic institutions and amongst the worst in the country.
I've been following the Commission for 7 years, still am, and among all the stats I've seen, that's a pretty serious one. It's the most serious one for an order with priests in it.
20%, so like 1 in 5.
To put that on top of, you know, stolen generations, then sex abuse on top, it's a pretty sad story.
And they were just evil. There were old brothers there used to just walk around at Abbotsford and say to the boys, oh, we got lots of lollies in our pockets. And the boys used to grab a handful of, you know, yeah, if you grab it and play with it, we give you more lollies. And, yeah.
It's just fucking wrong. Fucking wrong. Sorry for swearing, but I get so annoyed. They knew what they were doing. I mean, you just imagine all the boys, all the girls. It's like dishing us kids up on a platter. You can take your pick.
But they wouldn't believe kids. Not even your parent, not even your dad. This priest should say to me, if you don't do things I want you to do, I'll go to get your sister or your brother.
I'm really sorry. I'm really, really sorry. I know I'm not the Catholic Church, but this is, I'm really sorry.
Gotta be strong. I want the rest of the people to know about it as well.
But this is modern times, you know? You can never forgive them for what they did to our people. They did a lot of damage and they got away with it.
The
the so-called orphanages of New Norcia closed in 1974 after nearly 120 years. And in that time, it's estimated that some 2,000 Indigenous kids from all over the state made their way through these buildings. St Joseph's, the Aboriginal girls' school, was turned into a museum, an art gallery. Its long and painful history blurred by the finest collection of religious paintings in the Southern Hemisphere.
It was more valuable to them than what they did to our lives, you know.
But the thing about New Norcia is that nothing about this place is ever quite as it seems.
Today, the gallery was a sad sight, robbed of its most precious treasures by two men in a daring daylight raid late yesterday.
There's one more thing I have to tell you about these paintings.
One thing's been bothering me, Mark, about this is the value of this collection.
To be fair, you're probably wondering, what happened to those paintings? Because when they came back to New Norcia in 1986, they were in a bad way.
I remember going in and from that story and seeing those paintings laid out and the terrible, terrible damage that had been wrought on them.
The edges were ragged, the paint was peeling off on the corners. Some of them had even been kicked out of their frames, so you can imagine the damage that done to, centuries
old
old
oil and leaving one painting close to splitting in half.
The task of that restoration, and when you saw it up close, again was unbelievable.
We're talking about a very large sum of money, and we will probably have to decide not to restore some of the larger canvases.
These are 16th and 17th century paintings, so they're quite old, they're dry, they're fragile. You can restore them, what's called infilling and repainting, retouching. At the same time, a restored picture isn't the same as a picture in its original condition. They lose some of their beauty and they lose some of their value.
And it's heartbreaking and confronting, absolutely.
It took them decades, but with the help of community donations, the monastery did get those paintings back on the walls of the gallery.
Ken and myself went up for that, we were invited up for that day.
We really got to these paintings only 2 or 3 hours before they were due to fly out, so things fell in place, probably a bit of divine intervention.
What was it like to be there and see all the paintings?
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah, it really was. You really felt like we'd done something good in their lives.
Oh, it's one of the better ones I've worked on. A lot of satisfaction seeing the paintings back at the gallery.
Well, I just can't believe they've restored them and got them in these lovely frames. Looks really beautiful.
But that doesn't really answer Pam's question.
What do you know about the value, the historic value of these artworks?
The New Norcia Art Gallery prided itself on its collection.
Said to be worth between $750,000 and $2 million. To a $3 million collection of paintings.
Valued at up to $10 million.
That gallery is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, what? How did all this end up here?
A lot of that artwork would have been among the oldest artwork that Western Australia had in its possession anywhere. As far as the value of the collection goes, I don't think anyone really knew.
And that is where Nicholas comes in.
Described as possibly the best private collection in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yesterday, 2 men destroyed that collection in just 40 minutes. 61-year-old.
I'm Nicholas Lambourne. I worked at Christie's, the auctioneers in London, from 1981 until the end of 2020. And it was in that capacity as a roving valuer for Christie's that I visited Australia in March 1995. By the time I got there, the pictures had been slightly, not neglected, but they'd had a rough ride. Essentially why I went there is to demystify and to sort of try and sober up the description of the work.
Have you seen the pictures?
No, actually.
Do you want to see them? Yeah, just for your own curiosity. I want to show them too.
Their rarity is without question. Their financial value hard to assess. Their worth in terms of delight and pleasure beyond any price.
Any first thoughts?
So these are the copies.
What you're looking at there are the pictures that were stolen from the monastery.
And are they, they're originals?
Why do you ask that question?
Well, this in particular, I know it's in the European Museum. The original is in the European Museum. Yeah, so...
Sadly, it's not the greatest collection in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a rather modest collection. The majority of pictures are copies of Roman Neapolitan Spanish paintings of varying quality. Essentially, most of the pictures are derivative. They're copies, they're later pictures, they're studio pictures. They're by followers of the great masters, and so their value is accordingly more modest.
They're all a lot of really bad paintings. Right? It doesn't mean that they're not made from that time. But, you know, not everyone is a great old master.
So, yeah, I had to sort of pour cold water on them. They didn't get upset about it. I mean, they were just pleased to have a better idea of what they really had. That would then dictate how they would proceed, and that was the whole idea of the exercise, yeah.
And to be fair, the value of the stolen paintings was always a point of conjecture.
Value in the paintings was a real bugbear. We sought as many people as we could in the art world, university, the art gallery, Western Australia, trying to get some sort of a value, if we could, on the paintings. We were told priceless. How do you value priceless? Well, I can't answer that, and they couldn't answer it either. But when it comes to a court situation, you have to put a value on them. So in the end, I think all we had to have was call somebody to say they were valued at more than $10,000, I think it was.
10,000 for the whole collection? I don't really understand. We've just gone from 11 million in the film to $10,000. Yeah, it looks like we're going from way too high to way too low.
We never knew. We just assumed they were valuable.
You know, they're impressive works, they're big works, they're grandiose, they're religious, and they do a job in Norcia, but that kind of value is a very tall poppy.
Nicholas won't tell his final figure. That's for the monastery's eyes only.
There are one or two quite good pictures amongst this accumulation of pictures that was put together. Well, I think any monastery, any religious institution, paintings, images are part and parcel of the fabric of the monastery. It's an extraordinary collection. The fact that it's not massively valuable isn't that important, I don't think.
A great lesson to young would-be art thieves in what not to do. If you're going to get something done, get some professionals in from Europe who do a lot of stealing, apparently, and they're very good at it. Don't hire people like Bruce, and definitely don't hire people like Nigel and Noel.
After all of this, you got clandestine meetings, you got the Manila plot, you've got an interstate art heist, you've got tying up an old lady. For what? Does it steal a bunch of copies?
And make more copies.
Copies of copies?
Copies of copies. Copies. Obviously, not much was expected to be lost in the translation.
It's all just a bit depressing, isn't it?
All art crime is, for whatever reason. I mean, this is just, it's depressing in its stupidity, and it's depressing in the destruction of at least one artwork and the damage of the rest of the ones that were stolen. For what?
And in the end, I mean, this crime, in the grand scheme of crimes committed at Norcia, this doesn't even come close to the worst.
No, absolutely not. And we should never forget that.
Perhaps that art theft placed Norcia on the map in a way that all of us can better understand and accept that, yeah, there are always two sides to a story and other stories to be told. And I feel it needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be understood so that it doesn't ever happen again, clearly. But it is part of Norcia's story, and it can't be ignored.
The Benedictine community of New Norcia has apologised for the years of physical, emotional and sexual abuse. Those accused in the past have since died. To date, $15 million has been paid in redress to victims. There are, however, several compensation cases still outstanding. In 2022, the monastery announced it was selling nearly 8,000 hectares of farming land to fund ongoing compensation responsibilities. The land was purchased for $17 million by Harvest Road, the agricultural business of billionaire Andrew Forrest. The future of the monastery is uncertain. Just 7 monks live at New Norcia now.
It is likely that community will not survive as a monastic community. I can't see it growing, and if it's not growing, it doesn't have a future.
For now, the town site and that old art gallery remain in the community's hands. They are an award-winning and popular West Australian tourism attraction.
They got that as a tourist town. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Have a look what happened inside. Don't worry about the buildings outside.
I went in there and there was a lady doing it. She was a tour guide, and there was tourists in there. And one of the people there asked her, were there any Aboriginal girls, people in there? She said no.
The tour guide said there were no Aboriginal kids there.
Yeah, so I put my hand up. That's not the truth.
New Norcia Monastery says that since 2020, its tours have included a visit to a rock of remembrance, a memorial added to the grounds to people who have suffered neglect and abuse.
I would say that the most important thing to know about New Norcia is that it's 2 things. It is Australia's only monastic town, and it has a wonderful history of art and culture of the Catholic sort in it. But it's also a site where Aboriginal ceremony took place and where there is a whole story of Indigenous Australia which gets obscured by the story of the glorious monastic tradition.
This whole thing started, at least for me, as this weird 80s art heist in the bush. But when you look at all the things stolen in this tale, those paintings at New Norcia, they're like the tiniest piece of the puzzle. And that theft sits in the shadow of this brutal history that we haven't fully heard, and we need to hear it. But we still have people who can tell it.
I mean, the world got to know this. We were nobody, nothing. And see, I was given a gift to tell all these stories, you know, and that's my intentions of telling people the truth. We, the Noongar people of this country they call Australia, have been traumatised and suppressed throughout those assimilation years. Although our land has been taken, we must retain and guard our boundary, as we, the Noongar people, know that we don't own the land passed down to us by our forefathers, that the land owns us. We must cherish the land, the trees, rocks, waters, the birds and lizards that live on our sacred soil, so that we can tread in their footsteps and allow our children to follow. Oh!
If you or someone you know needs support or advice, contact 13 Yarn, 13 92 76, 13yarn.org.au. Bravehearts, 1800 272 831, bravehearts.org.au.